Jamie McKinnell reporting live outside Sydney's Long Bay Jail. Linda Burney is the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians and Social Services and joins me this afternoon. Linda Burney, welcome.
Good afternoon.
As we just heard there's a brawl inside Long Bay Jail. It was broken up after guards fired tear gas into crowds of inmates today. But what I find particularly interesting in this story, I'm sure we're going to hear more, helicopter vision showed inmates using materials to spell out the letters BLM, a reference to the Black Lives Matter movement. What do you make of that?
Well, I probably know about as much as you do. I've just heard your report then, and I've just read a very brief media statement. I have seen the footage that you've just shown. The obvious thing to say is that there are a overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in prison, and it would not surprise anyone that those prisoners would be very familiar with what's going on and their own circumstance. But Patricia, I know as much as you do. I hope the situation has been brought under control. I understand that one person has been taken to jail from being bitten by a dog, and I just hope that the situation calms down and that there's no further injuries.
Labor Senator Melandiri McCarthy has called on Prime Minister Scott Morrison to convene what she says it should be a national cabinet of Indigenous incarceration and deaths in custody. Do you think that's the way that the government should be proceeding on this issue?
The government needs to address this issue. They've said almost nothing all week. And of course, we know that these protests have happened for the 13th day in a row in America, spread right across the world, including Japan and South Korea, and obviously a really big issue here in Australia because of Aboriginal deaths in custody. I am very much saying that the government needs to relook at the recommendations, as do all governments across the country, because there are many state jurisdictions that are involved as well. But it would do the government well to re-examine this issue because it is at a crisis point, the number of people incarcerated and the fact that there have been over 430 deaths in custody since the end of the Royal Commission, some 30 years ago, Patricia.
There was a report into this that found that the vast majority were implemented. It's a report that Ken Wyatt actually referred to this morning in his interview on our program AM on ABC Radio. What do you make of that figure? Is it a realistic figure about the sort of implementation of those recommendations?
My understanding is that there have not been very many recommendations fully implemented. Interestingly, they don't just go to governments. They also go to things like media organisations and a whole range of other places. I don't think it's correct to say that the report has been implemented mostly. My understanding is that there was a very much a cherry-picking exercise with the recommendations, and there are many, many recommendations that have not been implemented.
How about the way that people should be expressing this? The Australian Medical Association and also the Deputy Chief Medical Officer say that that people should go get tested for COVID-19. Should they be doing that if they attended these demonstrations?
Well, obviously, it'll be 2 weeks before we know whether there's a spike, and I think it was very important, and I'm certainly on record, Patricia, at saying that people that attended did so understanding what the legal and the health recommendations were. My looking at the footage last night is that many people took a great deal of care. I spoke to people that had been to the rallies, including a family who said that they felt very safe. Clearly, though, it is crucially important that people understood, and I think they did, understood what the legal and the health recommendations are and were.
Clearly, this is a huge issue that people are very, very passionate about. Do you urge protesters not to go to the streets again while we're in this pandemic?
I think the point has been made very clearly by the number of people that did protest here in Australia yesterday. I'm not in the business of telling people whether they should or should not take their views to the streets, but I do think what's important now is not so much whether there's more protest. I doubt that there will be, but what in fact people with a voice, governments, both state and federal, actually do in terms of the demonstration and the passion, and also the very real hurt that was expressed yesterday by both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Australians.
That passion is strong, but does it disappoint you that we didn't see such a strong passion when there were other incidents? You know, Tanya Day, I can go through the list of people who have been subjected to, you know, not exactly the same incident, but other incidents with police or police treatment. Why haven't we seen the same outrage in the community?
I think that's a question that we need to ask ourselves as people, as Australians, and we need to ask ourselves as people in the media like yourself, people like me, who has a voice within the Parliament. There have been, to my understanding, in just the last 12 months, 2 police shootings, and obviously death of Aboriginal people from the lack of action from prison guards and also medical establishments. The question has to be asked, how can this still be happening? And if it is still happening, why is there not more of an outcry from this country? The protests yesterday were, partly in solidarity with the Floyd family in America, and that has been the impetus. And I think many people have decided that if the impetus is there now, then let's use it now.
You mentioned some of the recommendations being even about the media. What do you think the media should be doing differently?
I think that there is a lot that the media can do differently. There are some incredibly fine journalists who are passionate about this issue, people like yourself and others, Patricia. But there are also some news outlets, let's put it that way, that just look for conflict and only do Aboriginal stories when it's a sensational conflict situation. In my view, these stories are important to all people, and therefore there shouldn't be a spike in these sorts of this sort of coverage when passions are up. It's an ongoing issue, and I think there is also a lot of training that particularly younger and new journalists could do to acquaint themselves with the truth of this country.
Linda Burney, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Patricia.
Linda Burney is the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians and Social Services. Returning to our top story this afternoon, the government has announced